And so Mendy turned around to me and said, there is a shooting at Bondi. My colleague is shot. You can jump out of the car, but I'm headed down there. And I said, I'm coming with you.
Today is Wednesday, February 18th. This is Boundless Insights, and I'm Aviva Klompas, live from Sydney, Australia. This is our first ever live episode, and I want to thank the Lewis Family Foundation and Australian Jewish funders for making it possible. 2 months ago, Australia experienced one of the most devastating anti-Semitic attacks in its history. What began as a celebration, Hanukkah by the Sea, ended in horror and tragedy. We're recording this episode from the Bondi Life-Saving Club, where people took shelter from the bullets on December 14, 2025. Now, the attack may have faded from international headlines, but it continues to cast a long shadow over this community. They're still grieving the lives lost. Survivors are still recovering physically and emotionally, and many are grappling with the knowledge that Jews were hunted in broad daylight at one of Australia's most beautiful and iconic public spaces, Bondi Beach, a place that draws thousands every day and symbolizes openness and freedom. The Albanese government has agreed to establish a royal commission to investigate the attack and, more broadly, the rise of anti-Semitism in Australia. There are strong opinions about what went wrong and what must happen next. My guest today is Kellie Sloane, Member of Parliament and Leader of the Opposition in New South Wales. On the night of the Bondi attack, Kellie was nearby at another event. She arrived while shots were still being fired and rushed to help victims. Before entering politics, Kellie spent nearly 2 decades as a journalist covering major events in Australia and around the world. She brings to this conversation the perspective of both a witness to the attack and a political leader grappling with what comes next. We'll talk about how Australia is responding and how a society confronts extremism without allowing fear to define its future. Let's get into it. Kellie, welcome to Boundless Insights.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is a tremendous honor to have you as our guest on our first ever live episode.
Can I say the honor's all mine? And it's so wonderful to be sitting here in front of a live audience, so many smiling faces, and that's the Bondi I want to be in.
Thank you so much. Now, we have listeners from all over the world. And before we get into the attack and the events that happened here, can you share a little bit about your background and especially what led you to public service?
Well, I was a television journalist, a news anchor at one of our major networks. That was my first job. So I had the absolute privilege of telling people's stories over 2 decades. I saw natural disasters and floods and acts of terror. I also visited the Oscars, got to do fun stuff like dancing with John Travolta. So I had quite a mixed bag of things, but it gave me the experience also of being with regular people in moments of crisis, and that taught me a lot about human nature. It gave me a great understanding of people. And so I also, though, spent a lot of time political reporting, so that sparked my interest in politics. And when I left journalism, and I think that was partly because I'd had that privilege of standing with people in their moments of pain and triumph, but increasingly I wanted to play a greater role. I wanted to be more than an observer. I wanted to play a role in the change that I wanted to see in our communities. And so recently, a few years ago, I thought, well, I'm ready to take the next step. I'm going to jump fully into public life and put my hand up for public service and be a member of Parliament. I was very fortunate that the people in the eastern suburbs, the Bondi area, voted me in, and it is honestly the greatest privilege and honour of my life to be in this role.
I want to move us to the events of December 14th. When you first learned about the attack, about the Hanukkah event at Bondi Beach, you were at another event and you rushed to the scene. Can you take us back to that evening, tell us how you heard and what unfolded?
I was at a Hanukkah event in the neighbouring suburb to Bondi Beach, and I was standing on stage about to deliver a speech. And my speech that afternoon was supposed to be one about hope, because it was a beautiful sunny Sydney day and there was music and there were donuts and there were people literally throwing their children into the air. Like it was that kind of day. And I said to friends there, you know what, the end of the year is finishing on such a bright note. Like there is so much hope. I think perhaps, is it possible we've turned a corner? And that was to be the theme of my speech. And so I was standing on stage and I was waiting for my turn to speak when all of a sudden the crowd started dispersing and started running towards the stage and locking down. And I couldn't see any danger. So we got on the microphone and said, please be calm. We'll find out what's happening. So I stepped off the stage and went to find out what was going on. And that's when a security guard said, ma'am, you're a potential, target. There's a shooting happening nearby. Get to safety. And so the first place I could see that was safe was a Hatzolah ambulance, a Jewish ambulance for the local community. And I jumped into that ambulance. And that was the point that changed my day, because the driver, Mendy Litzman, was on the phone on the two-way to his colleague Yankee, who was at Bondi Beach and had been shot. And Yankee was saying he needed help. And so Mendy turned around to me and said, there is a shooting at Bondi. My colleague is shot. You can jump out of the car, but I'm headed down there. And I said, I'm coming with you. So we sped down to Bondi and we were on the two-way the whole way. I was texting to the Hatzolah service that Yankee had been shot. We didn't know how broad it was until we came into Bondi Beach and moved in past Archer Park. And, we were going past bodies on the side of the road. Groups of people clustered around, people trying to support patients. And that is when we realised that this was a mass casualty event. And we did not realise that we were heading for the bridge where the gunmen were. We were looking out the side window. We were looking at the trauma. And Mendy was yelling out of the car, Yankee, where are you? Where are you? And he was saying, and he could barely speak because he had a collapsed lung from a bullet that had gone through his back. And he said, I'm near the bridge. So we drove and we parked under that bridge that is now infamous. And the gunman had stopped shooting at the point that we had arrived. And we were in the middle of it. There was a man and his son hiding under that bridge, cowering under the bridge. And I said to them, get in the ambulance. You'll be safer in the ambulance. And they said, but is it safe yet? And we didn't know. So I jumped out of the ambulance and I did a bit of a circle, again, not knowing the danger above us. So we ran, got the child into the car, and the poor little boy, he was, you can imagine, he was traumatized. And then I said, you stay here, I'm going in to help. And I ran in to the park at that point, and there were cars with their windows shot out. There was a loud bang that I discovered later was another gunshot. We all hit the ground. They thought there was another shooter at that point. And as I came into the park, one of the first people I saw was a surf lifesaver from this building who was racing out with a big tray of bandages. I said, give me a job. And he said, grab the bandages, plug the holes. That's what he said to me. And he said, apply compression. So I grabbed bandages and I went into the park and started to help people.
We're in a building that is right beside where the attack took place. And I obviously saw the images of the attack on social media and on the news. It made the news all over the world. And what was so striking to me when I came to see it in person is how very small it is. First of all, the green space where the Hanukkah event was taking place is right beside a children's playground. And the fact that no children were shot through in the playground, where lots of families gather every day, is a total miracle. And the second thing that I learned is that the place where the party was taking place was actually enclosed in a fence. So when the gunman was on the bridge, which was maybe 10, 15 feet from the site of the party, it is a contained area of Jewish families, and he's just taking pot shots at them.
He was hunting them. They both were. And one little girl did die, and she lost her life.
Matilda.
But it was a family festival. There was a petting zoo. There was a rock climbing area. And that fence that was around everyone, I mean, one lady told me on the ground she had literally pushed a child through. The child was trying to get through. It was a, wire, like they're the temporary fences for events. And the child was trying to get through one of the gaps. And the lady told me she just pushed the whole fence down. So when I arrived, there was chaos. There was fences being pushed down. There was people yelling. There were sirens. I'll never forget the sound of the sirens, just sirens.
You've said that what you saw that night will haunt you forever. It's just 2 months from the attack. What stays with you now?
I was with a lady when she passed away. And I wondered for quite a while, why was I there holding her hand? Like, had I intruded on a moment with a family? Like, what had I... You question, it's strange, the irrational thoughts that go through your head. And I found out later that she didn't have family with her. And I think I was with her. She looked me in the eye. I know she knew she was with someone. I said, we're with you. I'm holding your hand. I'm not leaving you. And then, she passed away after that. But I can't forget that. I can't forget the people that I sat with. I also feel strangely, it's a strange thing to say, but I am glad I was there because I think I had a role to help care. I feel like I did very little, to be honest. There were people that were actually saving lives. The surf lifesavers from this club were the true heroes. They were the people that were fixing people. They're the moments, I think.
When you think about it now, has the attack here changed how you think about Australia?
It has, in both good ways and bad ways. Because many will tell you in the Jewish community and in the eastern suburbs that we really feared this was going to happen. Like, this was a shock, but perhaps not a surprise. But the fact that this was the realization of our fears and it happened, I mean, I'm so deeply dismayed by that. But I also saw incredible courage and bravery, people coming up off the beaches and in their swimmers who'd been in the surf to help. Like 99.9% or more Aussies are great, beautiful people. They really are, and I've seen that because of the messages of support we've had from right around Australia and from around the world. And so that has filled my heart. And the silent voices, the people who perhaps diminished the threat to the Jewish community, who've now said, I'm not saying silent anymore, who are saying, I'm sick of this, I'm over the social breakdown, I'm going to speak up. And so that gives me great hope as well.
I want to ask you about that because I've heard you speak quite often about the everyday Australians who ran toward the danger. So there was the surf lifesavers. In America, we call them lifeguards. The police, the medics, and the people who just acted instinctively to help. How do you reconcile the courage that you saw on that day with the broader reluctance until recently to confront anti-Semitism in this country?
I think it comes down to our culture in Australia. We often talk about the she'll be right attitude. She'll be right, mate. It'll be okay. It'll sort itself out. And I think that's actually more ingrained than we think. And so for people who live outside of this community in the eastern suburbs, which has one of the greatest populations of Jewish people in the state, probably didn't mean any harm. We didn't think that there was harm by not speaking up. So I don't blame a lot of people for that, broader Australians who are good and who, just thought this would all go away. But what I am motivated by and what does inspire me is the fact that they're speaking up now. And this must be a turning point. I mean, it is a turning point, but we cannot lose that momentum and that voice that we are hearing now.
I think that's a question a lot of us outside of Australia have, which is, was it a turning point? Are people starting to take anti-Semitism seriously? Because, of course, we saw the vigils and we saw politicians step forward and say the right things, but we've heard a lot of statements for a couple of years now, and that has failed to keep the Jewish community safe. So are you seeing a sustained willingness to take real action to confront Jew hatred?
Not enough. Not nearly enough. I'm seeing broad goodwill, and I want to be clear about that. This is not the Australia that we want, the Australia that we know, and the Australia that we want our kids to grow up in, and that is a broad sentiment beyond the Jewish community. But we need to say more than words because there's also been a turning point in society where Jew hatred has been allowed to grow.
Totally normalized.
Pretty much unchecked. And there have been politicians who've spoken up, but far too many still haven't, not in meaningful ways. And we had huge protests in the city this week in Sydney. And at the front of those rallies were Labor members of Parliament.
So people understand these were protests in response to President Isaac Herzog visiting Australia to comfort the community in light of the Bondi attack.
That's right. And look, protests are to be expected, and it would be unusual if there weren't protests. But there was violence at the head of that. There were people that were whipping the crowd into a frenzy. And, Australians are over it. Most Australians are completely over it. But it's about what we do next, because I've also said to people, we had been anticipating this, but Bondi is not a full stop. That isn't the destination and where we landed. God, I hope it's a full stop. What about the next time or the next event? And that is what we have to be vigilant about.
I want to ask you about one of the drivers of anti-Semitism, particularly given your background as a journalist. So almost immediately after the attack, we saw denialism and disinformation spread online. And as a former journalist, what has alarmed you about how quickly the truth has been challenged?
It was so fast, this misinformation that people gobble up. That astonishes me. One example, there was a man in the middle of the massacre who, while I'm standing there supporting people, I saw him standing up, Arsen Ostrovsky.
Now, he's a good friend. He's going to be pretty happy that this happened, okay?
Yeah. He was standing there like a statue in the middle of all of the chaos with blood pouring down his head onto his body. And I just thought, he's obviously been hit, he's injured, but he is a bigger target because we still thought there was a live threat. And I went up to Arsen and I said, first of all, are you okay? You need medical help. You need support. You're in shock. And I took him down and handed him over to some people who'd come off the beach, and they took him to get some medical attention. Well, his images were on social media claiming that he was an actor, that this was somehow concocted. They had set up through AI something that looked like he was in a makeup set. I mean, that makes me feel sick to my stomach. And so at a vigil a week later, I made a point of raising that because we must call it out, because there has been a history of denialism through the ages about the pogroms, that the Holocaust wasn't real, that other, slaughter of Jews is not real. It was very real, and I bore witness to that, and I will continue to talk about it if that helps dissipate this. But it is a scary world, and this is where education plays a really important role. Critical thinking for our kids in schools. We need to reintroduce civics education in our New South Wales schools so we understand the value of our democracy and why it is so precious and why it needs to be nurtured. And we need to understand that we cannot take anything for granted, because this beautiful, lucky country that we live in has somehow become a standout in the world when it comes to Jew hatred. How on earth did that happen in this place? It's not she'll be right anymore. We have lost a sense of innocence. We lost that sense of innocence on December 14. And there are people who are fighting to get it back.
I think I've had this conversation with everybody that I've met here when they ask me, what are my impressions of Australia? And I say to them, man, it's a beautiful country. And boy, the people are unbelievably open and welcome and friendly. And then a shadow casts over their face and they say, and that's how it used to be. We were the luckiest people, and now this. You've talked a little bit about what you want to see happen in terms of education to address the anti-Semitism, but are there other policies and actions that you think must happen, be it in media or with law enforcement or government or regulations?
There will be policies that we have to implement, and I think cracking down on hate speech is one of them. But I have to say, I think it's a bigger issue than that, and it really starts with education in our schools. And it means having no tolerance for hate on social media, keeping our kids off social media. And thank goodness the youngsters were off social media due to a world-first ban on social media in our country, because it also meant that our kids were not exposed to the images of that day like they have been in other tragedies in our community.
You saw this personally in your own family.
A couple of years ago, we had a terrible stabbing event at Bondi Junction, not too far from where we are now, and our kids saw terrible images. They went across social media like wildfire. That didn't happen to the extent of that event after Bondi, so we did protect our kids from that. However, social media is a cesspit. TikTok is feeding through its algorithm misinformation and disinformation. And I fear it's indoctrinating a whole generation of young people, and that is the true war front that we have when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism.
You know better than most that Jewish Australians are absolutely shaken and many are questioning their future in this country. What's the message that you have for them?
The terrible thing is I don't know what to say to you. And this is what happened when I left the scene on December 14th. And I left the triage area and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what I'd seen. And I knew I had to go out in front of the cameras because I had been a first responder, but I was also the next moment taking briefings from the police and switching back and forth between local member of parliament, leader of the opposition and support person. But I had to then go out and I had to be clear when I saw the cameras. And I mean, the very first question I was asked is, what was I feeling? And I said, I just don't know how we can ever tell the Jewish community that they are safe again. And I don't know how to say it other than there is the great will of the Australian people to make sure you feel safe again, to make sure that you don't just feel safe, that you are safe. But that involves greater investment into our security agencies federally. It looks at the people that we're bringing into the country who don't align with our Australian values. It begins with education in our schools to make sure our children can critically assess the information they're getting online. And it involves a myriad of things. And this is going to take time.
Kellie, I can't tell you how many Jews around the world feel so profoundly alone and scared over these past 2+ years, and your voice has been an absolute light in the darkness. You are a profile in courage and ethics, and we are so grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Boundless Insights. This show is produced by Yochai Meital and Alma Ben-Zev. Whether you've been with us from the start or are just discovering our show, we are so glad you're here. If today's conversation sparked a question, challenged your thinking, or made you nod vigorously, I want to hear from you. Email me at podcast@boundlessisrael.org. Your feedback gives us ideas for new topics and new guests. And if you believe these conversations matter, there are 3 easy ways to support the show. First, follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. Second, help us spread the word. Share an episode with friends and family, post about it, or mention it in a group chat. It really does make a difference. And third, consider supporting our work. Boundless is a nonprofit and we rely on donors like you. You can make a gift at boundlessisrael.org/donate. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep the conversation going.